Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra, coming to you live from the CNBC-TV18 headquarters in New Delhi. Global leaders have been called for Prime Minister-elect Narendra Modi's swearing-in ceremony. Yes, the third term for the NDA government, from President Biden, Italian Prime Minister Meloni, to Russian President Putin and Ukrainian President Zelensky. All the world leaders have been praising the Prime Minister for this victory, saying they look forward to strengthening ties with India under his government's leadership. But this time, the situation is different. The last 10 years, the BJP had an absolute majority in parliament, which made passage of reforms and laws very smooth, as the opposition's strength in the parliament was weak. In the third term, even though the BJP secured 243 seats, taking the NDA tally to 292. The opposition showed its strength, securing 234 seats in parliament. What does this mean for the new government, and how is the world looking at the results in India, considering it is an important ally for all countries? We're joined by Kevin McCall, Managing Director at the UK India Business Council, and Michael Kugelman, Director of the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Centre. Kevin, if I can begin with you, how do you see this election result? Largely, global experts, pollsters were expecting a majority for the BJP and a 350-seat number for the NDA. That's not happened this time. They are dependent on their key allies. Where does this leave the Prime Minister's focus, the government's focus on reform and its objectives in terms of attracting businesses? How do you see the priorities of this new government and your expectations?
Thank you. Good evening, Parikshit. Thanks for inviting me on today. Firstly, just to emphasise what a remarkable democratic exercise India has just completed. Truly vibrant, diverse, hugely impressive democracy. The scale of the exercise without parallel is mind-boggling. Truly incredible. Can't praise the whole exercise highly enough. As for the result itself, we the UKIBC and British businesses look forward to Mr. Modi's third term as Prime Minister. We think this will bring a large degree of continuity, and that's something businesses value, continuity. So that's important. But at the same time, businesses don't necessarily want things to remain static. They want and expect reform and change. They want India to continue this remarkable transformation. So when the new ministers were sworn in over the weekend, we want to work with them like we've done when there's been changes of government before. We want to work with the new ministers and the bureaucracy to show that businesses and governments working together in proper partnership can be sort of a truly successful combination. Now, what does the reform agenda look like? There are kind of a number of things where I think business and government's objectives are aligned, and what we expect to see as part of the continuity. We expect to see continued development of physical and digital infrastructure in India. We expect to see that continued focus on education and skill development, and we expect to see a continued focus on those economic reforms, including, I think, importantly, India's journey in recent years in negotiating FTAs with countries. That global and trading integration, I think, is really important. Those three things, those three elements taken together, they're things that businesses welcome, and they will make India an even more attractive investment destination, create jobs, stimulate more technology development, and improve livelihoods for people and help India on its economic and social development journey. So although the results are not what people predicted, businesses are still looking at India as a hugely positive opportunity and still expect to see continued reform and continued transformation.
Okay, so you continue to see an opportunity for more reforms and transformation in India, even though the government has come to power with lesser numbers. Michael Kugelman from the Wilson Centre also joining us on the program. Thank you, Michael. Let me ask you about what's happening in the immediate term. It seems that the Prime Minister and also the NDA want to focus on the neighbourhood first policy. You've got leaders from Bangladesh, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Maldives, Seychelles, who have been invited for the swearing-in ceremony. How do you see the choice of leaders who've been called for the first formal engagement of this government?
Right. Well, it is very significant not only that that leaders from these countries have been invited to the swearing-in, but also that many of them have accepted the invitation. I think it's important in particular to single out the Maldives, which is, I think, one of the few countries where there have been some concerns on the part of India about relations, given how things have played out. But there was a very warm message of congratulations from the Maldives president, and I think that is quite encouraging. But look, I think there's an interesting broader question here. I think that there had been a question that came out soon after the results became known, and that is, would India's neighbors and would other countries more broadly change their perceptions of Modi as a leader, given that his mandate will not be as large as it was during his first two terms? And I think we've seen that the answer is quite clear. And the answer is that no, those perceptions have not changed at all. The fact that so many leaders, most of the SAARC countries, with the exception, of course, of Pakistan and maybe a few others, that's not a surprise, as well as many of India's Western partners in the Middle East and beyond, have all issued congratulations. Some of them came in even before the final results were announced. So I think that's an indication not only of how India's neighbors will look at this new government, but at governments more broadly. But yeah, absolutely. I do think that getting the neighborhood right, I think, has been a core foreign policy priority for the Modi government, certainly in its second term, and we'll continue to see that in its third term. And I don't think that Modi having to work within a coalition government this time around will have any impact on the ability to pursue that type of foreign policy to strengthen relations or try to strengthen relations with the neighborhood, just because I suspect there will be a fair amount of consensus within the coalition government. I would think that on some of Modi's domestic agenda, there may not be as strong of a consensus within the coalition government. But I think when it comes to foreign relations and ensuring that diplomatic ties and economic, commercial ties can be strengthened with the region, I don't see any objections from India's coalition partners, and I think that's very important moving forward.
Okay, so you don't see any objection to the strong foreign policy decisions that are needed. But Kevin, if I can come to you specifically on FTA talks, there are still pending issues on the FTA negotiations, such as automobile tariffs, tariffs on Scotch whiskey. From the Indian side, there is a request for more visas for skilled professionals. That's pending as well. Right now, you've got the United Kingdom also going to elections. Do you expect a final signing off on the FTA this year, or you feel that domestic priorities are going to take over both in India and in UK?
A very good question. It's one we've been discussing this week with UKIBC members and a wider group of stakeholders. Expectations remain high for the FTA and that it can be concluded this year. It's important to look at the FTA as a vital element of the wider and strong UK-India partnership. The FTA flowed from the comprehensive strategic partnership that the UK and Indian Prime Ministers signed in just over 3 years ago in May 2021 and supported by a 2030 roadmap. Now, the timing of the Indian general election results just come out this week, and in 4 weeks' time, I think, on the 4th of July, we will have the results of the UK general election. So in early July, we'll have a UK government and an Indian government with fresh 5-year mandates. And we see that as a real opportunity for both countries to sort of revise, refresh, extend that comprehensive strategic partnership. And there are a number of elements that will come through that, I hope, including the FTA, which I'll come to. What we're encouraging both governments to look at is creating a long-term partnership between the UK and India. There's a 2030 roadmap at the moment. We believe that the UK and India should look to form a 2047 roadmap that makes the UK a core partner of India on its journey to being a developed nation by the middle of this century. We also want to see expanded collaboration on technology development and R&D and innovation. UK and Indian businesses, academics coming together to solve some of the big global challenges such as climate change, healthcare or food security. Much more potential to do more things like we did together on the COVID vaccine. Defence and security is another area that should be prioritised by the new governments when they are both in place. Again, sharing and co-creating technologies there. And you mentioned visas and mobility. We want to see at the UKIBC a consistent and clear policies and practices in terms of both student mobility and labour mobility between the UK and India. And we want to see more two-way mobility with more UK students and more UK workers spending time in India, making that living bridge that Mr. Modi talks about genuinely a two-way bridge rather than at the moment, which is largely Indians coming and benefiting us in the UK and the UK economy. Lastly, on trade and investment on the FTA, this is a core part of the partnership. And so in early July, once the new UK government's in place, we hope that the negotiators will get back round the table and be able to drive forward and complete the negotiations. Before the Indian election, Minister of Commerce said that UK FTA would be something they would prioritise in the first 100 days. We love that ambition. But as you've alluded to, there's potentially a new UK government starting, if we believe the polls, which is always risky. If we believe the polls, the Labour Party may be forming the next UK government. If they do, they have told us, in every conversation I've had with anyone in the Labour Party have said that India will be a priority and the FTA will be a priority for them. But I think it's only fair that we would expect them
Kevin,
to
I have to put one final question to Michael before we wrap. Yeah, the reason why I would wait to see how things pan out, because yes, the Prime Minister had spoken about a 100 days agenda before the elections, but now they've come to power in a coalition, and both the coalition partners are insisting on a common minimum program. So it remains to be seen how much of the 100 days agenda will now be put forth in that common minimum program as well, because the portfolio allocations have to happen, and that's probably going to happen on the weekend. But Michael, my final question to you, when it comes to taking those tough foreign policy calls, we've had some strain in relations with Canada, the United States. Our relations with China have remained tense ever since the Galwan incident. The relations with Pakistan are no good either. Do you think, considering the coalition pressures, and this is the first time that the Prime Minister would be handling a coalition government, do you get a sense that maybe in the first 2 years, domestic issues, stabilizing the government might be a priority for the Prime Minister, and the NDA would just like foreign policy continuity without any major hiccups?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, clearly the domestic agenda will have to be a priority for Modi in the immediate term, particularly given the need, I think, to bring back some political capital that he may have lost with this smaller mandate. And one way of going about that is trying to address the issue of economic stress and the jobs challenges and inflation and all of that. So I think that will become a major priority. And I think that, indeed, I think that the coalition government will want to see, or should I say Modi's coalition partners will want to see continuity in foreign policy. And I think that, as I said before, there's not going to be much resistance from the coalition partners about what Modi wants to do. And I think when it comes to what Modi wants to do with Pakistan, I think that would entail ensuring that that relationship does not spiral out of control, even though Modi would also not have any interest, I think, in making the relationship better, sort of keeping it in that status quo position. I think the coalition would be fine with that. With China, I don't anticipate that the coalition partners would have any issues with what I imagine would be Modi's goal of trying to keep the temperatures down along the border with China, and also trying to work with partners like the U.S. to strengthen India's capacity to deter China. So, but when it comes to some of the more dicey issues, you mentioned that India's relations with Canada have been a bit strained, and with the U.S. to an extent. This is because of the issue of alleged extrajudicial killings and transnational repression, all of that. That could be a bit of a sore point, I would think, within the coalition, just because ideologically many of these coalition partners of the BJP do not see eye to eye on some of these issues. So that's something to watch. But bottom line, top line assessment, I really do think that that Modi and the coalition partners will want to ensure continuity in foreign policy, not announce anything bold or new, just so that there could be this, at least initially, a focus on the domestic agenda, and particularly when it comes to economic strengthening, certainly the reforms agenda down the road as well.
Right. Thank you very much, Michael Kugelman, Kevin McCall, for joining us on what you expect from Prime Minister Modi 3.0 and the NDA government 3.0, which has come to power in a coalition. We're going to take a short break here on Global Eye, but don't go anywhere. The European Union is holding its 10th parliamentary election and the first since Brexit. Nearly 400 million Europeans will be selecting their representatives to the European Parliament. A discussion with Sweden's former Prime Minister Carl Bildt on the other side.